Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site, working in collaboration with Lifestart Swine. And today we're online with Jenny Patterson. She is a research scientist and swine industry liaison with Livestock Gentec at the University of Alberta and is based in Edmonton, Canada. Patterson's research is focused on gilt management to improve sow lifetime productivity and retention. Thanks for being with us today, Jenny.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
And today we're going to talk about your research area, focus area, which is managing gilts. So let's start with the why. Why is it so important to focus on good gilt management?
Well, I think it's really important to focus on good gilt management because gilts are such a critical component of the sow unit. Gilts are the foundation of good production, and they drive farm success now and in the future. When I think of good gilt development, one of the goals is to improve sow lifetime productivity. And sow lifetime productivity itself is a function of two main factors, and that would be retention and longevity. So how long that female remains in the herd, and productivity. So how many pigs she produces during her lifetime. And of course, we want to do it efficiently as possible. So fertility is also an important component of sow lifetime productivity. Sow lifetime productivity itself is a very hard trait to measure on farm. And that's because it's both a long process and a very complex trait. So a gilt becomes a replacement female at birth, and we'd like to see her make it to at least 3 parities. This is because those are the most protective parities, and 3 parities is where the data would show that the female becomes a positive economic return on the investment you originally put into that female. One of the challenges, again, with sow lifetime productivity, it's a very complex trait, and there are so many different factors during that productive lifetime of the female that can both positively and negatively affect her future production. So factors such as your genetics, your health programs, nutrition, the environment, and people and biosecurity all play a role. So I think it's really important to work within the professionals within your industry and within your organization to have a real team approach when trying to improve sow lifetime productivity. More recently, I think one of the biggest reasons we really have to have a focus on this is that I've had some opportunity to look at some large data sets. And I think one of the biggest opportunities in our industry right now is to focus on that early parity loss. So that loss between P1 and P2, we need to make that better. And I think that is one of the ways we're going to set these gilts up for future sow lifetime productivity.
Very good. What are the key components to a successful gilt management plan?
So when I think of what the key components are, and really focusing on that time from selection, so the time that she enters the gilt development unit, so about 150 days of age until she's bred, I think there are 4 key components. The first one is age at puberty, and that is really driven by age at the start of puberty stimulation, age at service, weight at service, and having a heat no serve at first service, so having at least 1 detected heat. I would really recommend everybody talk to their individual genetic suppliers because there are some fine differences between these targets between the genetic suppliers, but overall they're very similar. But the goal is all the same, is to set that gilt up such that when she enters the farrowing room, that she's set up for future performance. She's going to make it through that first lactation, wean a good litter, and be rebred and farrow that parity too. And I think when you think of these 4 key components, I often get the question of, if I was to choose just one of them, which one would it be? And I think the question is all of them. These are not 4 independent traits. We have to view them as a more holistic approach and try to get as many of these gilts bred meeting all those targets and not just choose one individual one. And I think what I start to do is liken it to having 4 wheels on a well-functioning car. Each of these tires is really equally important to make this car run properly. You wouldn't put a spare tire on 1 or 2 of those tires and expect this car to function properly. And I think it's the same when we're starting to set these gilts up for improved sow lifetime productivity.
How do these components lead to greater lifetime sow productivity?
Oh, that's a great question. And And as I mentioned, these are not for independent targets, but they do have individual positive effects on future performance. So the first one, as I mentioned, is age at puberty. There's a lot of great data, and it's really conclusive in the literature that those gilts that have an early age of puberty be considered select female, and they have increased sow lifetime productivity compared to those later responding, those older gilts that we see in every gilt development unit. They will have increased retention, better farrowing rates, more pigs born alive, and have fewer non-productive days. The second target is age at service, and it is really intrinsically related to age at puberty. We see a lot of those same benefits. But the problem with age at service is if we start breeding them too late, the negative effect will happen. They'll have a decrease in retention. They'll be at risk of being bred overweight, and they'll be low efficiency sows. The next key component is that weight at service. And I think weight really drives overall retention. So those gilts with a weight of greater than about 170 kilograms will have poor retention rate. They'll have an increased mature body size. So throughout their productive life, they'll cost more to feed. It may be a welfare concern. Weight at service, heavy weights at service may lead to more feed and refusals in lactation or an increase in stillborns. And I think when we're looking at weight at service, it's also a balance because we don't want to breed them too light. If we breed them too light, probably less than about 135 or 140 kilograms. And again, really depending on your genetic supplier, lightweight gilts will have decreased first litter size. They might not perform as well during that first lactation. And the last key component is having a heat no service that first service. This will result in an increase in farrowing rate and litter size at that first service. And of course, this isn't just looking at that first litter, this translates to the future production. So we'd see gilts that had a heat no service have better retention rates and also more pigs born alive.
So you've talked a little bit about this, but how do you select for better sow lifetime productivity?
I think that's a great question. And it's actually, it's hard to do. And I think the best way to do this is an implementation of a good puberty stimulation and heat detection program. And we have to remember those are two very different jobs within the gilt development unit. I think one of the key items is to start puberty stimulation early, right? I would recommend no later than about 170 days of age, and really maybe even a little bit younger, because this is the only way for us to enable us to hit those targets we just talked about. For example, if you start puberty stimulation at 200 days of age, and given the growth rates we see in our industry today, most of those gilts might be heavier than those target weights and will have to be bred at first estrus. So I think the real driving force of getting these gilts set up right is early puberty stimulation. Another key component of any good gilt development unit is the boar. And I think it's maybe one of the most under-recognized key components of any gilt puberty stimulation program. You need to have a good replacement program in place to make sure you have lots of good boars coming up. Direct contact is better than fence line contact, and bringing the boars is better to the gilts, better than taking the gilts to the boars. And I also appreciate that in our industry right now, labor is such a concern. So many producers I see just do fence line contact. But I also want to caution you that if you're doing fence line contact, make sure it's just not one boar that you use all day going down in those gilt development units, checking all those gilts. I see some producers using groups of boars or gangs of boars, they might call them, with 8 to 10 boars in that alleyway for really maximal stimulation that we can in a fence line situation. And then I think another key component to setting these gilts up right is the people you have. The gilt development unit is such a critical component for your future production. So I'd really recommend having an elevated position like a GDU manager or a GDU lead that really gives those people the recognition they need, because they really are the foundation of that future production. And of course, for me, one of my key things that I like so much is using data, and managing and measuring those key components of that gilt development unit is really essential. get accurate data and do reports so you can see what your outcomes are to really make some data-driven decisions.
Going to say data is so important in the industry right now, right? I mean, that
Mhm.
is just key to everything that we're doing right now, right?
Yeah, no, like, it just opens up the door to what we can do in our analytics and our and what we do in the future. And I think some of the problem is that it's a good thing we have so much data, but sometimes we just have piles and piles of data. And with mobile apps and everything, we even have
Yeah.
more data. So it's what we do with that data which becomes the important thing as well, too.
Very good. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to interrupt you. So I know, please continue on if there was other things you wanted to talk about.
No, that's totally fine. I was only gonna mention one more thing, and I think, again, with our industry, we can't forget that good guilt management just doesn't stop at that first service, and we have to remember, again, we want gilts to farrow that first parity, wean a good litter, be rebred, and farrow parity too. So what I would encourage us to do is maybe expand our view on what we think good guilt management is, and maybe extend that to P1 development. Keep that view that that guilt is still developing, and our goal is to rebreed her at parity too. So again, there are important factors that we must consider: that feed management during gestation, condition our weight when they enter the farrowing room, management of both the, the sow and the piglets during that first lactation, and of course, management post breeding and post weaning and post breeding is really important. And I think one of the things that it's a great saying that I heard one of my colleagues say once is we really have to start with the end in mind. We know we want good sow lifetime productivity, so we have to make sure we set those gilts up right to achieve that.
Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for all the information today.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site.